As we find ourselves right now in the middle of a global pandemic, in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, this is the time as believers where we need to be asking ourselves the question, how is my prayer life doing? We need to assess not just the health of our prayer life, but we also need to actively work towards improving our time in prayer with the Lord. And we need to go to the Bible for that, particularly getting our eyes on an example of a vibrant prayer life. And in the Bible, there are plenty of examples to learn from and to grow from and to find motivation from. And while there are a multitude of examples that we can pick, I want to isolate one this week, and that is the Apostle Paul, a prayer warrior who exhibits the health and vibrancy of his prayer life in many letters that he writes to the Thessalonians, to the Ephesians, to the Philippians, to the Colossians, to the Romans, to the Corinthians. But particularly, we find great encouragement, great insight as it relates to improving our time in prayer in Ephesians chapter 1, verses 15 to 17, as we find Paul unpacking his prayer life and giving us a window into three aspects to his prayer life: why he prayed, when he prayed, and what he prayed. We find Paul's motivation that thrusted him into a desire to pray, diligently praying, and deep praying. And so for this week, I want to tackle one each day. And beginning in this video today by just setting this section within its context and framing this series for you. In Ephesians 1, we have Paul elaborating on the great salvation that God has accomplished in Paul's life and accomplished in the lives of the Ephesians and in the lives of every Christian, the believers whom he saves, beginning from eternity past to eternity future. And as Paul is wrapped up in this glorious feat accomplished by the Lord, Paul finds himself urged to pray, beginning in verse 15, that purpose clause, for this reason. Now, this is something that is very telling, because between verses 3 through 14, Paul has just been summarizing God's sovereignty over salvation. And now in verse 15, he begins to launch into prayer. After singing to God, he now begins to pray to God and speak with God out of a grateful heart. And this gives us keen insight into what fuels our prayer life. It is our meditation on the sovereignty of God over our salvation. There is nothing that drives us quicker to God than dwelling upon His sovereignty over every facet of our salvation. And that is something that, as believers, we need to remember, that when we dwell upon the might of our God from eternity past to eternity future, God's role, the Father's role, the Son's role, the Spirit's role in saving us and securing us to glory, that is what drives us to our knees to dwell with the Most High God in prayer. So today, think about the sovereignty of God's salvation. Read Ephesians 1, verses 3 through 14. Wrap your mind and your arms again around the great salvation that God has afforded us, and let that drive you to prayer. And in the days to come, we will tackle why we should pray, when we should pray, and what we should pray as it relates to this section and meditating on our great salvation. I'll see you tomorrow as we look more at why we should pray and our desire to pray. God bless you.